All right, it's 7 o'clock. I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. Hope you all had good holidays. I'm excited to introduce our speaker this evening. Janssen Hang is the executive director and co-founder of the Hmong American Farmers Association. Janssen grew up growing, harvesting, and selling vegetables for the local food economy. And he currently runs his own family-owned value-added business, marketing spring rolls and egg rolls at the downtown St. Paul Farmers Market. A 2001 St. Olaf graduate with degrees in biology and Asian studies, Janssen has over 20 years of experience in agriculture. 12 years in small business management and 7 years as a licensed real estate agent. Janssen is also one among just a few certified Hmong Mekongs, which are cultural brokers. Janssen likes to spend his free time with his family in the outdoors. So welcome, Janssen. We're excited to have you here this evening, and we'll be monitoring the Q&A or the chat. We'll monitor the chat for questions along the way. So
Great. Well,
you may begin.
great. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to join all of you this evening. My hands are a little shaky, although you guys can't see it because I'm seeing that there's 78 participants, and a little nerve-wracking to know that as well too here. But welcome and thank you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to join you in this evening here and to share a little bit more about who I am, who Hmong farmers are, as well as some of the cultural components of the Hmong community here. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Rachel, as well as Dakota County Master Gardeners here. As Rachel has mentioned, my name is Janssen Hang. And I am one of the co-founders and also the current executive director with the Hmong American Farmers Association here. Well, I figured before I just give you guys a little background, I have a little agenda here. So one is a little introduction about myself, who I am. Two is to talk about who the Hmong people are. Many of you may have known who are the Hmong people, interacted, have seen them. If you've gone to farmers market, there are a number of Hmong farmers there. At the same time, I'm going to give you an overview of who the Hmong American Farmers Association is, or HAFA. We currently live in a world of acronym right now, and I prefer to say HAFA over the Hmong American Farmers Association because it's such a mouthful. And last but not least, to share you about HAFA and what our core programs are, especially when we think about, who the Hmong people are, and then we think about agriculture, we're thinking about, sustainability. Right? And what does that look like? So once again, my name is Janssen. My parents immigrated to the United States 44 years ago. And I'm the fourth oldest of 7 children here. And I have been farming with my parents and my siblings for the last 30 years. And that all started with picking cucumbers for Getney, a large pickling company here right in Minnesota. Over time, my parents started to transition to mixed vegetable, and we started selling to the farmers market, both the St. Paul as well as the Minneapolis farmers market. But as newly immigrants here, my parents has always instilled in their children that the key to success is through an education. And every summer we would farm to generate income for our private school tuition. And it was necessary that all of us would contribute to the family farming operation. So to plant, cultivate, harvest, and sell the produce. And so every summer, we're always envious of our friends and our colleagues who would share stories about their family vacation or going up north to the family cabin or fishing or spending time with their neighbors or school friends. And so in fact, among the siblings, we would unionize and we would go on strike because we were so tired of going to the farm every day, going to the farmer's market, after the farmer's market, go to the farm again and to weed and to cultivate and to harvest, under the scorching sun and in the rain here. But not long we knew it, we were right back in the fields here. We would tell our parents, we're like, no, we're not going to do it. And they're like, oh, you don't want to do it? You want to go to school? And we're like, okay, we're coming back here. So every summer we would reflect. And we would reflect and we would tell ourselves to study hard and never look back, right? Because it's so onerous. It is so onerous. So who are the Hmong people? And like I said earlier, many of you may know the Hmong people, but many of you may not know the Hmong people, or let alone know the Hmong history. So the Hmong people are an ethnic group, indigenous to southern China thousands of years ago. Right? And in those days, China was made up of many different ethnic groups, each with their own principalities or kingdom, and they were war against each other for power. And because of this strife, that many Hmong people began to migrate to what is now Southeast Asia and started settling in the hillsides of Burma and Thailand, Vietnam, and of course, Laos, right? And the Hmong people in Laos were an ethnic group. They were a minority, and they're also very poor. So on the mountaintop, they live as subsistence farmers and only grew enough food for the family. Classic agricultural problems. With no surplus, of course, there isn't any sort of development, right? But the Hmong people employed many conservation practices: successive planting, intercropping, polycropping, organic practices, and shift cultivation. It kind of starts with slash and burns. So every 3 years, they rotate to a new piece of land or to a new hill because they have exhausted the nutrients in there, or let alone that, oh, the produce didn't grow as well anymore. The other thing that the agriculture calendar dictates our Hmong traditional life, from how one's birth to being recorded to when someone gets married. I remember asking my parents this question, like, Mom, Dad, when did you guys get married? And they say, oh, we got married, it was like 3 years after the invasions of the Viet Cong, and it was during the time of harvest. And harvest is typically, September, October. And that's how they would describe. Right? So the Hmong agriculture dynamics really rely on reciprocity, on shared labor. So to get crops planted and harvested. So this whole notion, this idea of cooperative isn't a foreign concept to Hmong farmers to understand at all. Family and kingship is very important to Hmong people. We belong to one of 18 clans designated by one's last name. Whether you're a Hang or a Vang, a Yang, a Li, or Shang. And so since it is taboo to marry someone in your same last name, almost everyone is related to each other through marriage. Like many Asian cultures, we practice ancestral worship. And every year at New Year's, just like we did a couple of weeks ago here, that we offer gifts and prayers to our ancestors for their protection and support. We believe that everyone has a spirit. And if one is sick, it's because the spirit has wandered away from their body. And so we have this ceremony called Hupli, or calling of the spirit, calling the spirit back. And that's something that's very common, that every year in the Hmong community that we will have a Hupli, or called Blipekyo. It's the end of the year. We would call the entire family to come back to be one in receiving the upcoming year. In 1954, the United States signed the Geneva Accord, which basically states that the United States would not have any sort of military interaction in Southeast Asia. But because of the Cold War concerns and the fear of the domino effect that as Vietnam fell into communist hand, so too would Laos and Thailand fall. And so the US sent a team of Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, operatives to begin working and training Hmong villagers in Laos in the early 1960s. And because of this actuality and the violation of the international treaty that was signed in 1954, this became known as the Secret War. So after the Vietnam War ended and when the Communist Party took over Laos, they began systematically targeting Hmong families for reprisals. Hmong families engaged in a mass exodus out of Laos, and approximately about 30% of our population died trying to escape. Those who survived crossing the Mekong River into Thailand were placed into refugee camps, deemed as political refugees, and later processed and resettled to various other countries throughout the world. Nowadays, there are Hmong people that lives in Denmark, Australia, France, Argentina, French Guiana, Canada, and of course, the United States. And I remember reading a quote from a National Geographic article of an old Hmong grandfather who said, "I have never left my village, but now I am going to a strange country to live and die. But America will be great for my children. They say all children can go to school there." How fascinating. And coming here to the United States, like my parents, they came and made various trips throughout the United States and landed here in Minnesota. And for all of us, right, if you didn't know that Minnesota actually holds the largest population of Hmong people, second to California, with over 85,000 Hmong people here. So although we are second in population in California, we have the largest concentration because of the Twin Cities metropolitan area, because we are rooted in families. And staying close to family is critical, as opposed to California, so it's so vast and large here that the Hmong community is completely spread out from Northern California to Southern California. But the biggest thing is that the Hmong people here in Minnesota are heavily involved in food production, processing, or preparation, and definitely mostly farming here. The Hmong people are the largest Asian subgroup here in the state. And the majority of the Hmong people in Minnesota continue to live in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And if you didn't know, that the Hmong population in Washington County was one of the largest and fastest growing pocket of Hmong residents in the United States here. And according to the Minnesota Hmong Chamber of Commerce here, Hmong community in Minnesota had the purchasing power over $500 million. Now, a lot of that has to do with the success of Hmong farmers. And for those of you who live here in the States, if you go to any farmers market, you will see that there is an abundance of Hmong farmers or vendors here. And in fact, Hmong farmers in Minnesota, especially the Twin Cities Metropolitan Farmers Market, makes over 50% of the vendors, produce vendors at the farmers market system. So you can see farming is very attractive in Hmong families, in the Hmong community. And like mine, it's because my parents didn't speak English, nor do they have the skill set to survive in this post-industrial society. But they knew how to farm, and they're not afraid of hard work, and families helped each other out, and pretty soon, Hmong farmers became synonymous to the farmers market. So just between the Minneapolis and St. Paul farmers market, the strongest farmers markets in the area, there are over 500 Hmong farmers. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So Hmong farmers started selling to the farmers market ever since the late 1980s. And what really sparked this was started in the 1990s when the Hmong farmers really led the local food movement, as well as the revitalization of the farmers market system, especially Minneapolis and St. Paul, making both of those markets won a top 10 farmers market in the nation here. And just 2 years ago, the St. Paul Farmers Market was named #1, the top farmers market in the nation here. But regardless of their effort in leading and revitalizing the farmers market here, the Hmong farmers face a lot of challenges and barriers here around lack of access to land or affordable land near the Twin Cities, lack of access to capitals and credit, lack of access to markets beside the farmers market system, lack of access to research and training. And so all of these barriers have regulated Hmong farmers to more second-class status here. where on average Hmong farmers only earn $5,000 per acre, compared to their Caucasian counterparts who are earning $8,000 to as much as $20,000 an acre if they're growing organically. And to share one of the stories that a farmer has shared with us is that, because of the vulnerability here, that Hmong farmers were more susceptible to exploitation and discriminations. One of our farmers shared, and if you know, in Dakota County here, is that is one of the largest county of Hmong farmers. It's because the soil is so nice and rich in Dakota County that every single Hmong farmer wants to farm in Dakota County here. And a Hmong farmer has shared us a story that they would undergo a verbal land lease with the landowners. And that in this verbal land lease here, they would lease the land at $350 per acre. And at times that this landowner will also add a stipulation that the farmers must allow the farmer, the Hmong farmer, complete access, right? Must allow the owner complete access to come to the farm and harvest any produce that the Hmong farmers is growing. Right? On top of that, is leasing this property to the Hmong farmer at $350 an acre. While in reality, they were leasing to their Caucasian counterparts at no more than $150 an acre. So because of some of the injustice, the challenges and barriers that Hmong farmers face, that HAFA, the Hmong American Farmers Association, was founded in 2011 to address the injustice faced by Hmong farmers, including lack of access to land, an unfair rental agreement, lack of access to market beside the farmers market, lack of access to credit and capitals, and access to agricultural training that is conducted bicultural, bilingual, and also conducted by a Hmong staff and delivered in Hmong, and also someone who is representative of their communities. So what is HAFA? What is the Hmong American Farmers Association? Our mission is to advance the economic, social, and cultural prosperity of Hmong American farmers in Minnesota through capacity building, cooperative development, and advocacy work. We are a membership-based organization because our founder believed that system change does not occur by helping one or two individuals, but rather by developing critical mass of people, aligning shared values and acting in solidarity. That we engage our members and their family members to learn about the barriers they face, develop shared solutions, and work to put the structures and system in place that would help our farmers build community wealth and lift individual families out of poverty. So programmatically, we help our farmers access land and model sustainable agricultures. This is something that we had actually modeled on the HAFA farm. We help a farmer get access to new markets through our food hub, which we run, and we train them on various different topics, from soil health to growing perennials or break-even analysis through our robust training program. We also help our farmers write business plan and get microloans through our business development program. And then we also conduct research with our farmers on a variety of topics, such as the effects of cover crops on water and soil quality, or the interaction between bee colony collapse disorders and mixed vegetable production. And a lot of our focus revolves around our theory of change. And that HAFA was created to foster equity in the food and farming industries and to dramatically change the landscape of Minnesota Hmong farmers. That we believe that through our theory of change is rooted in our whole food model, which inserts that all aspects of the food and farming industry relative to land, markets, capital, training, and research must be simultaneously and freely accessible to immigrant farmers to truly build intergenerational and community wealth. And that in this theory change, like as mentioned here, that it is rooted in our whole food model. And programmatically in our whole food model here, they focus on organizing and advocacy work, the whole food model. And that at the end of the day, the outcome is building community wealth. And programmatically, you can see that in this diagram that we have our land access program, the alternative market, financial assistance, trainings, research, and innovation. And as you can imagine that each of the program is like a spoke to a wheel. And that while it's necessary to have land so that I can grow my produce, it doesn't have substantial impact. Because if you can have land to grow your produce, but you don't have the market to sell it, how are you going to generate revenue and support yourself and your family? So if you have land, it's necessary, but you have market. If you don't have the market, it doesn't have substantial impact. But if you have land and you have markets, you can grow your produce, you can find a place, a market out to sell your produce, but you don't have the financial system. It's necessary, but does not have substantial impact. Or that if you don't have the training or the research to be innovative to grow your farm business operations here, it does not support you holistically here. So if you can imagine like the spoke to a wheel here, if you have one without the other, the wheel is not strong because the spoke is what carries the weight. And that is the ethos of our whole food system, that everything must be simultaneously and freely accessible to build intergenerational and community wealth. So taking a step back to that, what does HAFA offer? And one of our core programs is our land access program, where HAFA manages the HAFA Farm, which is a 155 incubator educational and research firm located right in Dakota County. As many of you, maybe Dakota County residents here, if you guys are ever traveling along the Highway 52 corridor here, you will see a bunch of little red sheds on both sides of the freeway here. And that is a HAFA farm. And on that HAFA farm that we model sustainable and safe farming practice, we teach our farmers about being a steward of the land here, where we implement a number of cover cropping, farming on the contour, and at the same time, learn from our farmers about the traditional agricultural practices. Unfortunately, slash and burn is not a common practice as it was back then, but many of our farmers are always interested in doing so. We always tell them that you guys got to wait. We got to wait until we get a burning permit here if we're going to actually burn and do anything else here. But at the same time, because we work on the HAFA farm, that the HAFA staff are able to provide technical assistance, support our farmers about these various different practices, about what is the best way to really build your soil, or some of the challenges that they run into around disease and pest management. The other program we have is a financial assistance program. And in that financial assistance program, that HAFA provides financial counseling. And in fact, we don't directly provide financial counseling, but we work with a number of partner organizations, like Lutheran Social Service or Ridgewater College and the farm business management instructors there. That we work with Lutheran Services, we work with our farmers here to obtain family financial assessment through Lutheran Social Service here. Right? And our financial assistance program is all about focusing in building our farmers' farm business acumen so that they have a deeper understanding about financial literacy, budget, cash flows, expense, indirect, and also direct expenses here. Beyond that, we also work with our farmers to write business plans and provide financial statements so that they can take this to any lending institution and obtain a loan, whether a large $100,000 loan or even a micro loan through Farm Service Agency to make any sort of farm asset purchase, whether that is for their small international farm all tractors here, or whether that is to build a coolbot or refrigeration so that they can elongate the shelf life of their produce, or whether that is to invest into perennials, because with access to the HAFA farm, now they have long-term land access that is near the Twin Cities and also at an affordable price. The other program that HAFA offers is our training program. As I mentioned earlier, Hmong farmers have been leading the farmers market and revitalizing the farmers market and leading the local food movement here. And while we know that we live in this great state and have the resources of the University of Minnesota extensions here, while all the research and all the studies, information are being developed here, none of it is actually being translated into Hmong for Hmong farmers here, or let alone that there isn't a Hmong extension staff here to articulate and to reach out to the Hmong farmer community. So what HAFA has done is that we created our core program that is one way, shape, or form heavily focused and revolves around the University of Minnesota Extension as well. That focuses on 7 core curriculum: whole farm planning, soil health and soil fertility, pest management and disease, post-harvest handling, produce safety, farm tractors and maintenance here. And each of our training program, it is actually being delivered in Hmong. PowerPoints and worksheets are written in Hmong and handed out. We have pre and post surveys here. And so that our farmers can easily read and obtain the information. At the same time, while we do this, we also provide it in English too. Sometimes we will give them materials in English because they can take the information home. And who is at home? It's their children. They continue to work with them day in and day out to call the seed company and say, hey, my parents want to order X, Y, and Z seed, or to call the fertilizer place here. So their children are just as heavily involved as their parents are. So sometimes we bring them or give them the information in English so that when they take it home, their children can help interpret some of the information or continue to reiterate what was actually taught during our training program. HAFA also runs and operates our research. On the HAFA farm, we have designated a site here, which is our research/demonstration site. And on that research site, we would focus, as we talk about, and try new things, nuances like cover crop to our Hmong farmers, that they're like, well, what is a cover crop? And what is the importance of a cover crop? And what does it look like? And then all of you guys may have known that there are over like 50 different type of cover crops that's available. And it's overwhelming, especially when you're being taught about cover crop and how this improves your soil health or builds organic matter or supports with compactions here or, increase your nitrogens, right? It's overwhelming. So what HAFA does is that on site is that we will demonstrate it. We would grow various different type of cover crops here on the HAFA farm. So while our farmers farm on the HAFA farm, they also have the opportunity to see it firsthand. Oh, this is what oats look like. Oh, when the oats die, this is how you take care of it. Oh, when you turn it under, oh, this is what the soil looks like. So we do this with oats. We do this with wheats. We do this with clovers. We put in like 7 to 8 different type of cover crop, and we rotate them year after year. The other thing that we also focus on is various different type of varieties of produce that our farmers are growing as a way to kind of test the different type of produce. Like, hey, you've been growing this variety of Brussels sprouts. Maybe you should consider growing this variety because we tested it and it seemed to do very well with the soil texture that we have on the HAFA farm. Or sometimes, as you guys all know, that there's climate change is real. And so what we've done is that we would erect these high tunnels. And 2 things, we erect the high tunnels, one to showcase a new type of farming practice. Second of all, is because of the short growing season here, that the purpose of the high tunnel is a season extension. So if you're waiting to plant in May, if you have a high tunnel, you can actually plant in late March and early April. And by May, you can actually have produce that you can take to the farmer's market as opposed to just planting in May and waiting until June to actually harvest. But also in the high tunnel, we will also showcase various different things like flowers and herbs and vegetables. One of the biggest challenges that when we showcase them in the high tunnels, many of our farmers are reluctant to invest into a high tunnel. They're like, wow, that's $20,000 investment. When am I going to ever see the return on my investment? And being in the HAFA, because we are heavily focused on building farmers, that we're very transparent with our practice. And so in our very first year in erecting our high tunnel, we had incorporated heirloom tomatoes. And based on our studies and what we sold in there, we were able to generate $25,000 in revenue. We share that with our farmers. So many of you guys were scared about erecting a high tunnel because You're afraid of when you will see you return your investment. And based on our study this year, that we were able to see the return on investment in that very same year, and let alone see a profit of $10,000 as well. And so when we first started this in 2014, this high tunnel, many more reluctant, and we start seeing that climate change, especially in the last 2 years of the drought that we've experienced here, many of them have started erecting high tunnels on the HAFA farm. So if you're ever traveling, you start seeing more and more high tunnels on there. And that is one, to elongate the growing season, but two, that it's in a structure that's in a control structure here, and that the potential impact of natural elements, defecating your production is minimal. And last but not least is our food hub. So I mentioned earlier that all the spokes of the wheels needs to be present. It needs to be simultaneously accessible, freely accessible here to building generational wealth. And that's where we incorporated our food hub program, or alternative market program, that houses our food hub. And currently in our food hub, we operate a 19 farming family member food hub. Yeah. And that in that practice, what we would do is we would secure contracts during the winter month, currently right now, whether with co-ops, with restaurants, with retailers, or schools, right? And once we secure these contracts, we'll connect with our farmers, and we would distribute these contracts among our farmers here. And before the growing season, we will host a number of trainings around like food safety, and that we will help our farmers that every year they will put together a food safety plan that governs their farm business operations here. So in the past years, prior to COVID, we actually sold to 166 schools and fed over 98,000 students here. But because of the pandemic, and that completely changed and altered how, one, food is being processed, two, students just being in distant learning here, that we saw a dramatic decrease in our contract with the school system. But as a result of that we also saw a significant increase in our CSA, our Community Support Agriculture Program, operating over 1,000 members last year in 2022. That in our Farm to Family CSA program also includes our VegRx program, where we partner with mHealth Fairviews in 5 clinical sites in the Twin Cities metropolitan area, that on a weekly basis from June all the way until the end of December, we will provide a weekly box of fresh produce grown by our farmers here to low-income, food-secure families. On top of that what we learned from this program is that it has been successful. Not only that it increases food access, but also addresses health disparity as well, because many of the patients are participants in the VegRx program, are also patients with chronic illness. And after having this weekly access to freshly grown produce here, that many of these patients with diabetes, we saw a significant reduction in their A1C markers here. That at the end of the day here, eating healthy, it's not about just eating healthy, but it's about being healthy. It's about controlling even chronic illnesses here. And so as a result of that we carry this forward into our farm to in-home daycare program, where we will provide weekly boxes to in-home daycare providers, where take the produce and prepare for the children's here. And so that what we've learned is that if we slowly change the palates of the children's at a young age, one, they're more likely to consume fresh, healthy produce. And second of all, that the number of chronic illness would hopefully be diminished by the time they're much older because of the healthy diet that they are on a regular basis here. So in a nutshell, HAFA and the work that we do, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, that Hmong farmers were subsistent farmers. They were subsistent farmers here. They only grew enough for their families. As I mentioned, that without a surplus, there's no development. But coming to the state, and because of the session of HAFA and creating market opportunities and the infrastructure needed to comply, that now they're able to grow their farm business operation. And so that there's a huge transition from subsistence to sustainability. So with that, I leave you guys a little information about who I am, who are the Hmong people, and the Hmong farmers here in Minnesota, and some of their struggles, obstacles, as well as some of their achievements as well. So I'll open up to any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen as well too.
If you have questions, we recommend you put them in the chat so we can all share them.
We have two questions.
I love some of the comments. Your maiden name is Janssen. Actually, it's funny because my name is Janssen because I was named after the priest who baptized me, Father Oliver Janssen here. So it's a Danish last name, but it became my first name here.
Do you want to run the questions?
Oh, so Janssen, we have one question from Rachel Lord. Does the HAFA farm allow group farm tours? Do you ever sponsor those?
Yeah, absolutely. So no, we just last year in 2022, we just started up our farm tour again. We have been hosting a number of farm tours ever since we were on the HAFA farm since 2014. And in fact, we have about over 1,000 visitors here on the HAFA farm, from elementary to high school students, international journalists, legislators, community members. So yes, we open our farm tour typically starts in June and run from June until August here.
Great. I also have a question, Pat. In terms of pest management, do most Hmong farmers use chemical pesticides, or is it more organic?
It's a combination of both. So sometimes I say both, is sometimes they do it without knowing. One year we had a farmer who is like our Brussels sprout queen. She loves growing Brussels sprouts, right? And she's been testing growing Brussels sprouts for a number of years. And when she first started growing Brussels sprouts, she grew them in large clusters, like 10, 15 rows. And what she learned that at the end of the year, all the Brussels sprouts on the outside had very large bulbs, but all the Brussels sprouts on the inside had really small bulbs. And over the course of the year, she learned that, hey, you know what? Brussels sprouts needs airflow. And so what she did was she started planting them like 3 row, and then she'll have like a 6 to 8 feet gap, and then she'll go 3 rows again, 60 feet 8 gap. And where I'm going with this, that in between those rows of Brussels sprouts, she would grow like dills and cilantros. And what she could harvest, she'll harvest the young and sell it to the farmer's market. But what she couldn't harvest and get to, she'll actually let it take it to seed. And so one year we had integrated pest management staff from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture came and toured the HAFA farm. And he was talking about, pest management, diseases. And he stopped at the Brussels sprout. He's like, oh, so what are you doing here? And the farmer's like, oh, well, this is what I learned about Brussels sprouts, and I want to utilize every inch that I have on my farm because I don't have much land. So I threw in like dills and cilantros and a bunch of little herbs. They're like, oh, this is great. This is like an IPM approach. And she's like, oh, what? Like an IPM approach. He's like, oh, so what you did is that you were growing all these and herbs and cilantros and dills here, letting go to flowers. So it's attracting beneficial insects to fight off the bad insects that are eating your Brussels sprout. And she was like, oh, I didn't know. So sorry, long story short, both a combination of both synthetic, natural, as well as organic pesticides that are being used here.
Thank you. There's a couple questions about your land. And the first one is, did HAFA makes some sort of agreement about their land this year or recently. And then the second one is I read that the HAFA farmers bought their land recently. Are
Mhm.
those true? One or
Those
the
are-
other?
Great, great, all of the above. So when HAFA, which I didn't dive into in the presentation, is that in 2002, well, in 2011, when HAFA was first started, we knew that land access was critical. But we could not find one. We were such a young, and also infant organization. We didn't have the credit, the capital, or the funding here to purchase land or to seek out land here. So we connected with a number of landowners in the first couple of years. And our executive director emeritus, Pat Koo, who prior to being and co-founding HAFA along with me here, her past life was in social investment. So she had reached out to her old boss, this firm, and he had connected Paku to a Jesuit priest in Iowa, who connected us to our anonymous benefactor, who had made this huge investment into the HAFA farm in 2014. And that in this investment that they had made on the HAFA farm, they bought the farm, and they in return had leased it back to HAFA on a 10-year lease. And that in return, we would take the lease and then we would sublet it back to our farmers. But at the same time, while creating this lease agreement with the anonymous benefactor, what happened was that there's also a clause in there that after the 10th year, or sorry, after the 8th year, HAFA or its farmers will have the first right of refusal to purchase the property. And that in this conversation, because one, the average age of our farmers at that time were in their late 50s and early 60s, that didn't seem like a viable option. And so 3 years ago, in 2020, in 2019, we started saying, hey, let's look at the various different opportunities. You know what, we are coming up to our 8th year. What's going to happen to the HAFA farm? What's going to happen to our HAFA farmer member and their farm business operation now that if they don't have land tenure? And so we worked with supportive legislator who had appropriated $2 million in the 2020 Minnesota infrastructure bonding bill to HAFA for the purchase of the HAFA farm. And so as a result of that we've been working diligently in the last couple of years here to obtain the match funding that was required here, and finally made the purchase of the HAFA farm just this past September here. So officially now it is owned by HAFA, not the farmers, but owned by the nonprofit organization, the Hmong American Farmers Association here.
Wonderful. Do you know offhand what percentage of Hmong farmers are a part of HAFA?
Oh, I was a very small part. A very small part of Hmong farmers are part of HAFA. And primarily because one, it's about trying to utilize the resources that HAFA has to offer, and many of them are interested in having long-term land access. But on the HAFA farm, so it's a 155-acre farm, but only 125 acre is actually in production. And the reason for taking the other acres out of production is because of the farmstead, the building, and also because of the rolling hills, and they're highly erodible land. And we thought that if we were to put this in production, that it's more of a disservice for our farmers, especially in a scenario where we have treacherous rain that comes through that's going to wash the produce. So it was best to take it out of production, which we did. And we put that into actually CRP, a conservation reserve program. So currently on the HAFA farm, we have 2 grass waterways and a wetland restoration site here that is in CRP with USDA. So on this, and where I'm going with this, because well, we take all these land, there's only 125 acres. Of this 125 acres, we subdivide it into 5-acre parcel. And each Hmong farming families here has the option to farm at minimum 5 to a maximum of 10. And so if you can think about it, 125 acre broken into 5-acre parcels only give you 25 parcels here. And with some farmers farming 10 acres, we just don't have enough land on the HAFA farm for everybody to farm. And therefore, that's why we are only able to really tackle just a very small amount of Hmong farmers here. But needs to say that our resources that we provide outside of the land here, that we can definitely do more, in which we do help them on a different note here, that we do support them to say, oh, this is how you access, FSA programs, the NAPS program, the non-insured crop disaster resistant program, or the EQIP program. But technically they are not a member of HAFA.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about what could the Dakota County Master Gardeners do to support the HAFA farmers? Can you think of anything?
Wow. One is relationship building. I think that one thing is what I've seen with working with our farmers is that farmers or master gardeners, that you guys are so innovative that maybe we can host a session where we can, cross, like be that nexus. HAFA could be that nexus where we can share that knowledge and information here. That maybe there might be some really good tactics that Hmong farmers can share with master gardeners, and vice versa, that master gardeners can share with Hmong farmers, saying, hey, this is what worked well. Maybe I don't do it on the scale, but if you can take what I do as master gardeners and potentially scale up to fit your farm's operation, I think that would be extremely unique, right?
Great.
Yeah.
We gotta support each other, right?
Absolutely. And not only that, but we also really need to value the importance of farming, right? The importance of farming, the importance of our environment and the ecosystem in which we all lived in. And so that's critical. And so that in any way, shape, or form here, to be honest with you, HAFA, we are in the midst of a really deep conversation with Dakota County, as well as the Minnesota Department of Transportation, as they want to take some land out of production on the HAFA farm to put an interchange. And we're very concerned. Some of the drawings that they were shared could potentially encompass anywhere from 5 to about as much as 20 acres of land. And for us, as small scale producer, we are extremely scared, because that could potentially displace 5 Hmong farming families, or let alone that could minimize the thousands of pounds of produce that is going out to our community, whether that's through the farmers market, through the CSA, through our farm to school programs here. So in other aspects here is to be supportive of the work that we do to really preserve agriculture, not just the practice, but also the land, because that's extremely critical.
Okay. Another question about, for the hub, do the farmers sell to the hub and then the hub sells and distributes the produce, or how does the food hub work? How does the food web work?
Good questions. So we aggregate. So the food hub, we aggregate from our farmers. So it's almost like it comes out of HAFA, but HAFA, because we are membership based here, so we just use HAFA as an aggregation, but we are just more so a pass through, where we would say, oh, here's a contract, we match a contract with the farmer's produce here, and then we deliver it to the end outlet here, whether that's the co-op or the schools or whomever that may be.
Lots of comments about what an outstanding presentation this was, Janssen. I'm just looking
Thank
for other
you.
questions. Does HAFA have a relationship with the University of Minnesota Extension at all?
Absolutely. We do. We have quite a deep relationship with the University of Minnesota. They're kind of like our go-to. We work with their trainers, extension staff, whether that's from perennials, mixed vegetable, IPM, or even their food safety. We also work with epidemiology departments here, looking at various different tactics and approaches that are impacting HAFA. So we're constantly bouncing and sharing ideas across alleys here. We also work closely with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. The MDA does a lot of research on the HAFA farm, especially around trying to capture, pests, the movements of pests across the United States. It didn't, at first I'm like, well, I was a little confused, but the more I talk to them, they're like, the reason why we want to work with HAFA is one, it's a mixed vegetable farm, right? Everything around us primarily is in conventional farming. So one is it's a mixed vegetable farm. On the HAFA farm, we grow over 160 varieties of fruits, vegetables, and also flowers here. And not only that, but because Highway 52 is a corridor, just a straight shot to the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, that sometimes with produce coming in and out, that may introduce new pests into Minnesota. And so we work with MDA to set up various different traps and do research to kind of have a deep understanding of what are the pests that is in our environment right now, and what should we be looking at in terms of, does it have dramatic impact to our agriculture system here in Minnesota? And so we do this annually with MDA. But extension, yes, we work heavily with them. We do a lot of day neutral strawberry project. During the winter, they help us with training. During the summer, we do a number of in-field training with our farmers and extension staff as well.
Wonderful. A question about whether the Hmong farmers have any special kind of fertilizer that they use.
No, there isn't any sort of special fertilizers. This is where it comes in for our training, that we're always introducing them to new fertilizers, new mixtures. A lot of it has to do with around organic fertilizers more so anything, because they know that, they can go to any sort of elevators and pick up a bag of 10-10-10 or 40-00 urea, right? And so what HAFA is doing is working with our farmers to start thinking differently, and thinking about, building soil health and using more organic fertilizers. So introducing them to more chicken fertilizers, to sustain turkey fertilizers. In fact, we've done a number of soil improvements and amendments on the HAFA farm, utilizing, products from Sustain as their raw turkey manure that we spread across our farm, as well as working with, oh gosh, I'm forgetting their name here, a local composting facility just right up the street from us, and distributing a number of vegetative or compost onto the farm.
Okay. There's a question about your CSA program. Are the pickup points for the produce all in St. Paul or Minneapolis, or are there pickup locations in Dakota County as well?
Good question. So we have not expanded our CSA, our Farm to the Family CSA, into Dakota County, except through just the VeggieRx program, where right now we have there's a couple of clinical sites in Apple Valley and Lakeville that we actually deliver to, but nothing heavily focused in Dakota County, and primarily because it has a lot to do with capacity. Right now we only have one refrigerated truck, and to make the delivery from Dakota to Ramsey to Hennepin County, is so onerous and so laborious here. But needs to say that, this is one thing that HAFA is working with our farmers and connecting with our farmers and say, hey, let's look at other opportunities. Maybe we need to collaborate and purchase another refrigerated truck so that we can expand our market opportunity into Dakota County, or let alone like Rice County or Scott County, just a little ways over as well.
Okay. Well, hope for that.
Yeah.
And I think a last question, do you offer cooking classes with the products that you grow?
We don't, I mean, well, one year we did, and one year we worked with, I don't know if you're familiar with Chef Dang. Chef used to do a number of like farm to table on the HAFA farm, because we would have like these, farm to table events with, partner organizations and our Veggie Rex program and Health Fairview. So Chef used to do a number of trainings with our farmers and also children of farmers. But Chef Bay became too popular, and then he like HAFA, just a small fish in the big sea for him now. And so we haven't done anything lately. But we do is, when we do our CSAs, what we do is we always couple our CSA with our newsletters or sometimes postcards in there with recipes of, certain types of Hmong produce. Sometimes we'll throw in like pea tip and like, oh, this is how you cook a pea tip. You'll use olive oil, you'll do salt, pepper, garlic, and you're good to go. Or we'll talk about, bitter melon or bitter eggplant. And we'll share that in recipes, but we don't actually have any sort of cooking class.
We have time for one last question, I guess. One last question. Any interest in having beehives or other farm animals?
Great question. So let me answer the farm animal. No. We're always interested in regenerative agriculture. However, our biggest challenge is around food safety. And because our produce that our farmers grow goes to vulnerable adults and young children here, we refrain from having any sort of farm animals on the farm. On the flip side, we actually have an apiary on the farm. We have, at one time, we had about 20 hives that were run by one HAFA staff as well as all of our farmers. We had a great session with the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, and Marla and Greg came out and did a whole site assessment here, gave a deep training with their farmers on, growing bees or raising bee in the northern climates here. And that was very successful until we got hit really hard one winter and also spring, where our bees didn't survive. And every year we continue to do it. So it's not as robust as it was 5 years ago. But currently we still have about 4 or 5 hives on there. And it's connected with the team and the farmers. They're ready to like ramp it back up and try to bring it back up to 15, 20 hives as well too.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, most of the comments, Janssen, are about what an outstanding presentation this was. Some of our master gardeners say this is the best presentation that we've had. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Sharing this information. We look forward to hearing more about how HAFA is doing and continuing the dialogue. Thank you.